assaulting the narrative, destroying their lives, unearthing the truth. I want the truth! This is The Truth with John Gordon.
I woke up feeling like garbage this morning. That's what the President of the United States called me, and you, if you're a Trump supporter. People who believe in America, want to make America great, stand for safe streets, closed borders, peace abroad. We're just garbage. Let's go in the studio. We'll sort this out. Oh, shit! Garbage. Let's go talk about it. That's all right. We're good. We're good. All right. So you know that Joe Biden said that.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm on the air.
Grasp on your head there. Take two.
The Truth with John Gordon will be back soon.
So you know that in the closing days of the campaign, Joe Biden said that Trump supporters were garbage. Well, it caused all sorts of uproar universally. People were weighing in on being garbage. Mark Cuban went on the circuit to talk about Trump. And then to make matters worse, he said that all the women surrounding Trump were weak females.
What do you make of that? And do you think having people like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, and other Republicans with Kamala Harris is going to put her over the edge with these Nikki Haley supporters?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it'll put her over the edge with Nikki Haley supporters. Donald Trump, you never see him around strong, intelligent women, ever. It's just that simple. They're intimidating to him. He doesn't like to be challenged by them. And, you know, Nikki Haley will call him on his nonsense with reproductive rights and how he sees and treats and talks about women. I mean, he just can't have her around. It wouldn't work.
I think Stormy is intelligent. I don't think that's 100%. She's very smart. Yeah, Stormy.
And everybody is talking about how Mark Cuban threw all strong women under the bus, or mostly all women under the bus. Because, I mean, just look at the women that Trump surrounds himself. Would you say that these women are not smart or not strong? Laura Trump, Melania Trump, Ivanka Trump, Sarah Sanders Huckabee, Alina Habib, Amy Coney Barrett, a justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Tulsi Gabbard, a decorated military personnel and former member of Congress. And what about Trump's granddaughter, Kai? She's an awfully special person and is probably headed for the Ladies Pro Tour. So Mark Cuban, you got some explaining to do, and I think that it's going to help you assume your role of irrelevancy, as we all would like to see occur. But so I ask you, what do you honestly think of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris when put in the context of being candidates for President of the United States? Here's Donald Trump's closing argument at Madison Square Garden.
Did anybody see yesterday? Did anybody see what took place? I was with the Muslims yesterday in Michigan, and when the polls first came out, they had 100%, I had 0. And yesterday, I watched this anchor on CNN almost choke. She said, something's happening in Michigan, big population, couple of 100,000, a lot of votes. Something's happening, the poll just came out. Trump is at 59, Kamala is at 8 with the Muslim population. They never saw anything like that, you know. And these are people, by the way, they're great. They just want peace. They want to have peace. And it's great. So Jews and Muslims and Catholics and evangelicals and Mormons, and they're all joining our cause in large numbers, larger than anyone has ever seen in this country before, larger than they've ever seen in any country. And the Republican Party has really become the party of inclusion, and that's something very nice about that. And we're a big, powerful party, and they're losing it. They're really losing it. Together we will lift America to glory beyond your wildest dreams. It's going to happen fast, too. So in conclusion, with your vote this November, we are going to fire Kamala, and we are going to save America. We will cut your taxes, end inflation, slash your prices, raise your wages, and bring thousands and thousands of factories back to America. We're even going to get Elon to bring that stuff back. We will build American, we will buy American, and we will hire American. I will end the war in Ukraine, which would have never happened if I were president. I will stop the chaos in the Middle East, and I will prevent World War III from happening. We will crush violent crime and give our police the support, protection, resources, and respect that they so dearly deserve. We will strengthen and modernize our military. I rebuilt our military in total, rebuilt all of our military, built 571 miles of wall, too. I took it out of the military because I couldn't get it from the people in Congress that should have given it to us. So I considered it an invasion. I said to a couple of generals, I said, congratulations, this is an invasion of our country. So I took it out of the military, had 9 lawsuits and won them all. We will build a massive defense shield, all made in the USA. We're going to build a beautiful dome over our country. And a lot of it's going to be made right here in New York. We will rebuild our cities, including our capital in Washington, D.C., which has become a very dangerous and badly managed place. We're going to make them safe, clean, and beautiful again. We will teach our children to love our country, to honor our history, and to always respect our great American flag. And as long as the Speaker of the House of Representatives is here, I would like to put forward a bill, because I watched 2 months ago as some very bad people, radical left people, by the way, nothing happened to them, in Washington, D.C., burned our American flags. They were burning flags. And I would like to suggest that we put in a bill, if you burn the American flag, 1 year in jail. We will get critical race theory and transgender insanity the hell out of our schools. And we will keep men out of women's sports. I will defend religious liberty, I will restore free speech, and I will defend the right to keep and bear arms. Our Second Amendment is under siege. After years of building up foreign nations, defending foreign borders, and protecting foreign lands, we are finally going to build up our country, defend our borders, and protect our citizens. It's called America First, and it's going to happen at levels never seen before. And I'll tell our friends, our allies, who sometimes treat us very badly, that it's about time we take care of ourselves. And we will stop the illegal immigration that's taking place at levels never seen before. We will stop it cold and once and for all. We will not be invaded. We will not be occupied. We will not be overrun. We will not be conquered. We will be a free and proud nation once again. Everyone will prosper. Every family will thrive. And every day will be filled with opportunity and hope. And very much so, it will be filled with the American dream. We're bringing back the American dream, and we're going to bring it back at the highest level that you've ever seen. But for that to happen, we must defeat Kamala Harris and stop her radical left agenda with a landslide that is too big to rig. So you need to get out and vote. Get your husband off the couch. The football game doesn't mean a damn thing. You got to get out and vote. Get up, Harry. Come on, Harry. Get up, Harry. Let's go. You're going to vote for the president, Harry. We're going to save our country. For the past 9 years, we have been fighting against the most sinister and corrupt forces on earth. With your vote in this election, you can show them once and for all that this nation does not belong to them. This nation belongs to you. It belongs to you.
And then Harris had her opportunity. Beyonce was going to come and sing at her rally, but Beyonce did not sing, and it didn't go over so well. And then the chaos ensued. So you've got very dramatic contrast. And I just ask you, do you want 4 more years of Trump, a good economy, low unemployment, low interest rates, crime going down, peace abroad? Or do you want the chaos of Kamala Harris? Open borders, defund the police, rising crime, wars in the Middle East and in the Ukraine, rising crime? To me, the answer is pretty clear. Chaos or order. That's the choice that we have. So as I've said repeatedly, 90 million voting age Christians in America. 40 million do not vote traditionally. Please, especially for those of you in Georgia, Virginia, Pennsylvania, these are the states that are going to determine the outcome of Tuesday's election. You have a special, unique opportunity if you are Christian and if you live in one of those states and if you typically do not vote. Please get off the sofa, just like Donald Trump encouraged, and go vote. So ladies and gentlemen, it looks like that all the campaigning is almost over. It's just a matter of getting out the vote now. The gaffes have come. Trump has just run an amazing, amazing campaign. Props to Donald Trump, Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita, and their entire team. They have run a masterful campaign. When we look back on 2024, we're going to think about that iconic image of Trump narrowly missing being assassinated. He literally took a bullet for the American people. We're going to look back at him serving French fries at McDonald's. We're going to look back at him showing up for work on a garbage truck. We're going to look back on the chaos that has surrounded Kamala Harris and her nothingness as a candidate. I don't know what Kamala Harris stands for. I honestly do not know what she stands for. They have run a campaign of hate. While saying that they're going to unite the American people, they have run a campaign of hate. They have compared Donald Trump to Hitler. Now let's think about that for a second. I think Hitler hated people, didn't he? He certainly hated Jews. He committed genocide. He led through fear and intimidation and hate. Does that remind you of Donald Trump? Donald Trump, who assembled the Abrams Accord? Donald Trump, who brought people together in America. Look at his rallies. Asians, blacks, Jews, Catholics, blacks, Hispanics. They're Muslims. They're all flocking to Donald Trump, and yes, Christians. While Kamala Harris no-showed the Al Smith dinner, flicked off every Catholic in America, while her response to 2 college kids who said Jesus is Lord, Jesus is King, she said, you're at the wrong rally. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the choice is now very clear. And here is what the electoral predictions look like for Tuesday night.
And finally, we also have Nevada, a state that's eluded Republicans for the last 20 years. Out of all the swing states, Nevada is the only one that Trump has never won before. But that is going to change in just 5 days. Nevada is going to go red. The state's been shifting to the right over the last decade. Republicans won the governorship here with Joe Lombardo unseating the Democratic incumbent, Steve Sisolak. And so as we finally enter the month of November, Donald Trump, I currently project to win 312 electoral votes. Kamala Harris, 226. This is going to be the worst Democratic performance since 1988. Harris really is in trouble right now. Donald Trump has never been in a better position throughout the entire election cycle than he is in right now. Trump is peaking at the perfect moment.
It's my honor now to welcome to The Truth John O'Connor. He is an attorney, he is a author, and he's got a lot of experience, decades-long experience, and has worked on some of the nation's biggest trials and involved in some of the most historic cases of our lifetime. John O'Connor, welcome to The Truth. You've authored two books. One is The Mysteries of Watergate, and the other is Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat. I want to talk about all that, but let's start by talking about your prosecution of Patty Hearst back in the 70s when she was kidnapped and then showed up in a bank with a machine gun and claimed, her defense was, as I recall, that she claimed that she had been brainwashed and she was not acting on her own free will. Does my memory got that right? I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but I can remember this trial from 50 years ago.
The defense technically was one of duress, that is to say that she was forced into it, but the brainwashing was key to the case because she had to explain why for 2 years she didn't make a break for it. And the concept was that she had seemingly, and she made these statements, that she was part of the Symbionese Liberation Army that had kidnapped her. And so the question was she telling the truth? Was she being forthright there? Or was she brainwashed into being a member of this group? And so it's a very interesting defense. They had the world's leading experts on brainwashing, the Stockholm Syndrome, so to speak, testify in court. And my boss and I were in charge of the psychiatric portion of the case. So that was the most exciting part.
So how old was she when she was kidnapped?
I think she was 21.
And I can't remember, did they nab her off the street or take her out of her home? What were the circumstances of the kidnapping?
First of all, some of the gang had been burnt in a shootout with the police. The house went up in flames, but Patty was not there and a couple other people were not there. So she was on the lam with a woman by the name of Wendy Yashimura, and they had been all over the country hiding out from the cops, and finally they were caught in a house in San Francisco.
Yeah, but when she was kidnapped, what were the circumstances of her kidnapping?
Oh, yes. She was in an apartment in Berkeley with her fiancé. She was living with him, and they broke into the Symbionese Liberation Army broke into the apartment, and they grabbed her. They kidnapped her. They put her in a car, and they took her off to the so-called safe house, where they kept her in one of these large Murphy bed closets. And that was where she was sort of imprisoned. And according to the government, she soon decided that she liked these people, thought they're pretty nice. They treated women equally, and they're nice people, and they had good ideals. And so she joined the gang. So
what happened to her fiance? Was he harmed in the kidnapping?
He might have been cuffed up a little bit, but he was just left behind and so forth. She sort of renounced her engagement to him and never really had anything to do with him again.
Wow, what a story. And you were right there. So you met with her, right? You met with her while you were preparing for trial?
We had permission from the court to bring our psychiatrist into jail, our main psychiatrist, and I was his so-called handler. I spent time with the psychiatrist. And so we went into the jail on a couple of occasions for him to interview her.
And what was her demeanor when you met her? What were your impressions of her as a person?
I thought she was a spunky young girl. Actually, I kind of liked her. She did not try to play act. I thought she was, like I say, a spunky young girl and had her wits about her. If I had to testify, which of course I didn't, I would have said she certainly didn't seem brainwashed to me. I kind of liked her. I think she had a lot to her. I don't think she was an intellectual, but I think she sort of went with her gut and liked the group that kidnapped her. That's simply what it was, and thought that they treated women equally. They were not patronizing. She felt her fiance had patronized her, that he hung out with all these Berkeley radicals, so-called radicals, but even though they espoused radical ideas, they never acted on them. And they kept women beneath the men, so to speak, and subservient. And whereas this revolutionary group, they acted out on their ideals. They really had women in an equal position.
And so, was she radicalized before she was kidnapped? It sounds like she was, that she was, or at least had those maybe leanings or those tendencies.
Not really. She would sometimes lash out. She would lash out at these people because they would sit around and pontificate. She was not an intellectual type of person. Every now and then she'd lecture them and say, hey, you guys are talking about all this stuff. Why don't you do something? But she wasn't really an intellectual type of person. She didn't have a lot of ideology about her. Like so many young people, she probably sided with the poor and oppressed, but she was not an ideologue like so many people were at Berkeley at the time. She just wasn't that type of person.
Pretty soon after she was kidnapped, she participated in the bank robbery and the famous scene of her with the machine gun in the bank lobby.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
How long after the kidnapping did she participate in the robbery?
It was just 2 or 3 weeks.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I was walking down the hall, and one of my friends who was on the bank robbery detail, he comes up to me and says, hey, I've got a picture from a bank robbery today. Who does this look like here, this bank robber? I said, well, that looks like Patty Hearst. And he said, it looks like Patty Hearst just robbed a bank.
Oh my gosh. What? I mean, you just couldn't, you can't make that up. I don't even think that somebody that wrote fiction could write that into a script. And so she was tried and convicted. And was the charge bank robbery?
Charge was bank robbery.
And how many years did she serve?
Well, she ended up serving a couple years. She had sort of a bad break there. The judge originally hearing the case and heard the trial, Oliver Carter Jr., was a friend of the Hearst family, and he'd bounced Patty on his knee when she was a young child. You can't make that up either. He decided he wasn't going to recuse himself. We didn't ask him to recuse himself, but he probably would have sentenced her to time served. The case switched to another judge who took a sterner view of it and thought that, well, we can't let her off because people will think it's because she's wealthy. So she served another year or so after the trial, which meant that she was in jail for a total of 2 years.
And is she still with us today?
Yeah, she's apparently very happy suburban wife in Connecticut. She is involved in a lot of animal charities, I believe, and has a nice life. She married a former San Francisco policeman who was her bodyguard, and I think they had a nice, happy life. I don't know if he's still alive or not.
So it was in that era, but about, let me remember, 3 years after that, you and I lived through the Watergate era. And I was in college then, and I was a political science major and have always been interested in politics. And I watched the Watergate hearings, and I've been somewhat of a student of Richard Nixon as well. And you wrote a book on the mysteries of Watergate. And tell us about the book and what you discovered. What mysteries did you uncover?
The real book that started it all off was Postgate. And the key to that is how the Washington Post covered up Watergate. They betrayed Deep Throat, covered up Watergate, and began today's partisan advocacy journalism. And in Postgate, what I go through is my dealings, not just with how I figured out Mark Felt was Deep Throat. Way back in the day, back in the 70s, I figured out he was Deep Throat. Then I met him 30 years later, talked him into coming out. And then in the process of dealing with the Post, I began to get suspicions that they were hiding something as Mark and I were writing a book after his revelation. And they were trying to keep me from publishing certain things. I began looking into them and realized that they were trying to cover up the fact that their journalism was, in a word, it was just untruthful. It was untruthful journalism. And as I show in Postgate, it was deliberately untruthful. And it's our most impactful journalism ever in our most serious political scandal, and we removed a president because of fraud by the media.
Do you think it was fraud by the media, or was it fraud by the intelligence agencies of our country, namely the CIA?
The CIA clearly had infiltrated the White House and had wrongfully denied being involved with Watergate. Of course, it's what they do. They deny these things. But the Post knew that as well. The Post knew that the CIA was involved, and they also knew that it wasn't a campaign operation that was involved in. It was people wiretapping naughty boys calling naughty girls down the street for a dinner date and things to follow. That's what this was all about, and the Post characterized it as coming from the White House. It did not, at least not from the Oval Office. Some younger folks knew about it, but also that it was a campaign operation. It was not a campaign operation under any way, shape, or form.
Well, of the 6 burglars, 4 of them worked for the CIA. And Bob Woodward, his career really just prior to working for the Washington Post had been as a naval intelligence officer. And as I've read, he went to work for the Washington Post, and within 6 months, he was assigned the biggest story that's ever hit our nation. And he was a very improbable person to have gotten that assignment. And so Tucker Carlson has advanced the theory that Bob Woodward was really working for the CIA, and that it was very intentionally a plot to get Nixon. Richard Helms, the head of the CIA, had a very contentious meeting with Nixon in the White House, and in the heat of the conversation, Nixon said, "Well, I think I know who killed Jack." And Richard Helms's response was a complete ice cold stare at Nixon. 6 months later, he was threatened with impeachment.
Here's what I would say to that. I would say that Woodward was not working for the CIA, that I think this all comes from a book, Silent Coup. I knew the author, the late Len Kolodny, who's a good friend of mine. And he took it a little bit far. It's very intriguing in the evidence that comes up. Now, Woodward was not working for the CIA. However, there were 7 burglars and supervisors. There was only one person, G. Gordon Liddy, who was not either presently or formerly CIA. So it was all CIA stuff. And there was some very, very clear proof that the CIA was involved. And Howard Baker, the senator, actually did a report that the Post did its best to cover up. Baker wrote a report that was appended to the Ervin report. The Ervin Committee report was 1,100 pages. There was some late blooming. The CIA tried to hide some documents. They arrived after the televised hearing, so nobody knew about these documents. But the documents pretty much nailed the CIA as being involved. Woodward already knew the CIA was involved, by the way, and he hid it. And Ben Bradley may have been a CIA asset back in the day when he was a foreign correspondent. So they had connections to the CIA, don't get me wrong. But they were there mainly to cover up for the DNC. They're close to the Democrats, and the Democrats were involved in a prostitute referral program for its out-of-town guests. So that was embarrassing. They also hated Nixon, so they didn't want to give him a break. So the Post was out to get Nixon and cover up for the DNC. The CIA just happened to be someone they also had to protect in order to protect the DNC. So they fought very hard to say the CIA was not involved, and they knew otherwise.
How did you develop an interest in Mark Felt? I mean, I've been pretty knowledgeable, as I said. I've studied it. I've read a lot of books. Mark Felt is not a name that was front and center during Watergate as I recall.
Some people thought he might be Deep Throat, but he always denied it, and the scent went somewhere else.
And he was an assistant director of the FBI. He was, I guess, would he be the number 3 guy in the FBI at the time?
Well, number 2. And when I was a young lawyer in San Francisco, in fact, the burglary happened 2 days before I started my first job. I became fascinated by it, and I felt that as a young lawyer that I could prove I should be able to prove who Deep Throat is through circumstantial evidence. And within a year or two, I felt I had a rock solid circumstantial evidence case that it had to be Mark Felt. It would be too boring for me to go through the labyrinthine proof that I came up with, but I was quite convinced by the mid-'70s that Deep Throat was Mark Felt. I didn't do anything about it. Met a girl soon thereafter, raised a family, started a law practice. And it wasn't until I'm sitting at this very table I'm sitting at now, and the person across from me was my daughter's friend. And as I was telling stories about my father's brief career with the FBI, he told me that his grandfather had been with the FBI and, like my father, chased German spies. I said, well, what's his name? He said, his name is Mark Felt. I laughed and I said, Nick, your grandfather's Deep Throat. Did you know that? So I went up to his house the next weekend to try to talk to him. Mark's daughter thought it was swell for me to do this. And so I began the process of trying to get Mark to admit he was Deep Throat. Then, after he admitted it, trying to get him to come out and tell his story. And then eventually trying to get him to commit to do it without Bob Woodward, who refused to acknowledge that Mark was Deep Throat. So finally, I did all those, and I came out with an article in Vanity Fair magazine proving that he was Deep Throat. So that's how the whole thing started. I'm surprised that no one else figured it out, because there were a lot of people on the Sen and nobody figured it out. I thought it was not obvious, but you had to put a lot of work into it. But if you spent enough time and looked at all the inferences, then it had to be Mark Felt.
So when you met with Mark Felt, did he acknowledge that he was Deep Throat?
It took a while, but no, when I started talking to him about it, I did it. I knew what buttons to push. And so I was there because I think I knew his psyche, and I started portraying Deep Throat as a hero. And when I first mentioned Deep Throat, his knuckles got white on his chair. He was an old elderly man with a touch of senility. His knuckles went white, but as I described how I considered and other young fellows considered Deep Throat to be a hero, young people that were in law enforcement, which I knew Mark cared about. He didn't care about the radicals. He cared about law enforcement. And I said, listen, I and all my buddies, I was a good friend of Bob Muellers, who you may know as the prosecutor, but he was in the office with me. And my father's partner had been in the Saturday Night Massacre, a fellow by the name of William Ruckelshaus. So I could drop a lot of names. I dropped Mueller's name, my father's name, told him I was an assistant U.S. attorney, qualified myself as a law enforcement fellow. And then I said, we all thought Deep Throat was a hero because he kept our system clean. And when I did that, I could see his eyes melting as if I were giving him absolution. I don't think anybody had ever told him this before. And I thought I knew what buttons to push. I knew why he wasn't talking, I thought. And I knew what would get him to talk, I thought, and that he would not be sullying the reputation of the FBI if he came out and admitted he was Deep Throat. And so I finally convinced him of that. It took a long time. And believe me, it took a long time to convince him. It took a while to get him to admit he was Deep Throat, and it took a long time to get him to realize that he could portray the FBI as being the good guys. And once he decided that, then that he wasn't going to harm the reputation of the FBI, then and only then would he speak. So then he spoke, and for the next few years of his life, he was a very happy man because he'd unburdened himself of this and sort of basked in the glow with his family, which is, it was a lovely thing to see, very frankly. It just is probably the best thing I've done in my life for somebody else.
Wow, what a phenomenal, phenomenal story. But he really wasn't that type of hero, was he? I mean, he was engaged in really subversive political operations, it seems to me.
No, Woodward would like to characterize him that way as being, just a lefty guy who hated Nixon. Number one, he didn't hate Nixon. He liked Nixon. He told me that later on. He liked Nixon, and I always knew he liked Nixon. His deal was he did not want the Watergate investigation to be unduly circumscribed, contained. He wanted free rein for the FBI to do a full and complete investigation. In his first meeting with his boss after the burglary, he said, "We cannot whitewash this thing. The reputation of the FBI is at stake." Those words, which are in an FBI 302, constitute Mark's motivation. It's there in black and white. The reputation of the FBI is at stake. We cannot whitewash this. And that is what, so other people have come up with their theories, or people want to say, oh, he's out to get Nixon. He wasn't. As a matter of fact, if you recall this, to sort of prove I'm correct, if you recall the part in the book of the movie where Deep Throat comes into the garage and says everyone's life's in danger, you're going to be wiretapped, you might be shot. Woodward's notes say that he was talking about the CIA. Now, Woodward did not dramatize that in his book or movie that Mark was talking about the CIA. But at the time, that's May 16th, 1973, when they had that last meeting, Woodward did not report that. Clear proof that the CIA was involved in Watergate. He kept that confidential, only printing it in his book once Nixon was on the rocks and he could do it, and he could get readers and later moviegoers by the dramatic scene. And it was never really explained. But nonetheless, Mark was not trying to get Nixon. In this case, had Woodward published what Deep Throat told him, it would have exonerated Nixon. That's the interesting thing about it.
I guess I wasn't advancing the belief that he was out to get Nixon as much as he was, it seems, and maybe I'm wrong, but that he was providing cover to the CIA. I mean, if there was an investigation to be had and there was truth to be learned, it seems to me it would have been to have disclosed and revealed the role that the CIA took place or conducted in getting Nixon.
No, that's what I'm saying. Now, Woodward should have reported that because he knew it. So Woodward hid that, and the Post hid it. And my point is that Felt told Woodward that the CIA was involved, that they were threatening lives to hide their.
I see. Now you said that, and now I'm clear.
Yeah. So he was equal-handed about this. Yes, there was he had hypothesized that the White House was involved as this being a dirty trick, but it turned out it wasn't. His hypothesis as to White House involvement was incorrect. All investigators have hypotheses. Oh, it might be the husband, it might be the boss, so forth and so on. I want to investigate this. So what Woodward did is when Felt told him his theory about how it could be the White House, Woodward published that as if it were gospel truth, and that got people to believe that the White House was involved. It turned out not to have been true, and that was disproved. Then later on, when he got proof that the CIA was involved, Woodward didn't print that. So he went too far nailing Nixon and hid the CIA's involvement. So what I look at this is, what I'm saying is, my thesis is, Nixon did get railroaded, but he got railroaded by the combination of Woodward and, of course, the CIA. Of course, the CIA is going to not admit that it was involved. That's what the CIA does. And so if the truth were known, we would know that the only time a president has been removed from office, and he was removed from office, there's no doubt about it, through this scandal, it was done by fraud of the media. Now, the upshot of that today, we're sensing today, the media feels like it's a political powerhouse. It got its political power from Watergate. It's taught in journalism schools that we are this great watchdog for justice, and what we say is what's really important. And to a certain extent, they're right, that the media can affect presidential elections and presidential fortunes. And they tried to do that with Russiagate. So in a way, it's correct. The problem is that once you feel that your job is to exercise political power, you have to put on a jersey. You have to be on one side or the other. If you're exercising power, you don't do it equal-handed. That's not power at all. Power is saying, my team is winning. I'm for the 49ers and against everybody else. So that's what's happened today. It's an outgrowth of Watergate. It's taught in journalism school that you're supposed to really influence public events. And I don't think that's a proper role of a journalist, but I get a lot of disagreement from people that are journalists.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. Who do you think killed Kennedy?
I actually believe that nobody's going to like this one, and I've talked a lot about it with people who have other views, but I still believe it was a single assassin. I believe it was Lee Harvey Oswald, and that there are explanations for everybody else. I think Howard Hunt was nearby. I think Hoover sort of botched watching him, but the FBI wasn't behind it. I don't think the CIA was behind it either. And there's good reason. Remember, about a week before Kennedy was assassinated, Lee Harvey Oswald tried to assassinate General Edwin Walker, who was a very far-right retired general. And luckily for Walker, who was in his study at the time, the bullet ricocheted off the wooden window pane separator. And they had that lattice type of window, and the bullet whizzed right by his ear, whereupon Walker hit the ground. But my point is, all theories about Kennedy's assassination assume that the hit was coming from the right, that the right side of the political spectrum was trying to kill him, whether it's the mob or the CIA or whoever. And in fact, Lee Harvey Oswald is what he appeared to be. He was a pro-Russia leaning guy who had married a Russian woman and tried to take out a right-wing general the week before. So if he tried to take out Walker, to me, the other theories just don't hold up. There's a good book by Gerald Posner called Case Closed, and I just subscribe to Posner's. Now, I've read other things about it. I've got a good friend, Mark Shaw, who's written a couple of good books recently about the CIA. My former boss, Melvin Belli, was connected to Mickey Cohen of the mob, and there's a strand there that as to the mob wanting to kill Kennedy, that Dorothy Kilgallen, the syndicated columnist who was clearly murdered by somebody with a drug overdose, that the theory that Mark Shaw has, and it's pretty compelling actually, is that the mob got rid of her and that she was on the scent. But now, what was she on the scent of? She certainly was on the scent of the mob. But in any way, there's some things. Yeah.
It's important to note that Dorothy Kilgallen was the only journalist to have ever interviewed Jack Ruby in prison after he was convicted. She returned to New York and called her friend Mary Smith, I believe, and said, "Be sure to read the paper this week. I'm going to blow the cover off the JFK assassination." And she woke up dead the next morning.
Right, exactly. That's where Mark Shaw goes. Now, I got to tell you something else while we're at it. When I was at Belli's office, I was doing research late one night, and I came across a box labeled Ruby. I picked it up, and I didn't have the presence of mind to copy it, but I spent that night and the next night reading it, and it was all the psychological workups on Jack Ruby. And remember, Melvin Belli defended Jack Ruby at trial, and then so the question is, what's Ruby's motive? And people say, well, Belli was mob connected, therefore it was the mob, doing this, trying to get a Ruby to be the fall guy and that kind of stuff. And Ruby was the guy that they used to get rid of Oswald. But anyway, I read the psychological file there, and I'm convinced that he was a guy who could go off on an instant rage. He's one of those guys that the drop of a hat would get inflamed and beat the hell out of somebody, for example. He had a hair trigger. Belli called it psychomotor epilepsy. But anyway, I've put all this evidence together, and I am not yet convinced that Kennedy was killed by anybody other than Lee Harvey Oswald, and that Jack Ruby's psychological profile was such that he snapped. Let me give you an example. Ruby would go into his nightclub, and some drunken patron would put his hands too close to one of the dancing girls. And normally that would, in another place, a bouncer might pull him off. Or if he did it again, you'd kick him out. But like Ruby, every now and then he would snap, and he would just beat the living daylights out of someone. he would snap, and he was odd, and the police protected him.
Let's add a few details to Jack Ruby. And if you have time, I'd like to continue this conversation for a bit, because this is actually something I know a little bit about. I was home from the 4th grade with the flu the day that President Kennedy was assassinated, and I sat in front of the black and white television with my mom for the next 4 hours, and then spent the rest of the weekend with my family. My dad and I actually saw Jack Ruby kill Lee Harvey Oswald on live television on Sunday morning. I believe it was about 10:30. I looked at my dad. He looked at me. We were the body English on both of our faces is, did you see the same thing I just saw? We were in a state of utter disbelief. But Jack Ruby was a member of the mob. He was from Chicago. He had mob ties that went back 30 years.
Jack Ruby was mobbed up, but he was a pretty low-level guy.
Well, be that as it may, and this was not an impulsive thing that Jack Ruby did, as I feel like you have sort of described it. He actually had been lurking in the jail the night that that Oswald was arrested. And as you are well aware, the first words out of Oswald's mouth is that I'm just a patsy. I will give you that you have touched on the one thing that I have no explanation or insight into, and that is his attempted assassination of General Walker. I've never been able to connect the dots, and still don't really understand what the connection with Walker and Kennedy would have been, and why you would want to kill a conservative general, and also I guess certainly at the time, a progressive Democrat. So that is a totally unanswered mystery in my mind.
John Kennedy was anti-Russian, and he had just had the Russian missile crisis. Oswald carried around signs, fair play for Cuba. He looked at Kennedy as being sort of on the right wing relative to Cuba. So Walker and Kennedy were in his mind of a piece, is what I would say. Now, David Talbot, I'm just trying to think what I've read of David Talbot's, but
That's okay. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but he wrote The Devil's Chessboard. He clearly, and it's a very long, well-written book, which was and am fascinated by. He concludes that Allen Dulles orchestrated and conducted the assassination of Kennedy. I happen to buy his version lock, stock, and barrel. Roger Stone also has written a book called The Men Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. He obviously concludes that LBJ was the mastermind behind the assassination. I don't think that those books are conflicting of one another. They just draw separate conclusions, but they're really pretty compatible because the evidence that they develop is very consistent. And then there is The Unspeakable, which is another book that I think is Bobby Kennedy Jr. endorses and subscribes to, that likewise concludes that the CIA killed Kennedy. I've read all three books, and I've studied this for 65 years. I have been frustrated that I would never learn the answers to the Kennedy assassination, and I've now, at least for myself, resolved in my own mind that it was totally a CIA operation. Oswald, there are witnesses that saw him in the break room 10 minutes before the assassination sipping a Coca-Cola. There is no question that he was in the break room after the assassination. The school book depository manager rushed through the break room with a Dallas cop. The cop said, "Who is that?" The manager said, "He works here," and they scooted on past. There were two ladies that worked in the adjacent to the stairs going up to the sniper's nest. They both testified that no one climbed those stairs immediately preceding or following the assassination. That would eliminate Oswald being able to get from the break room to the sniper's nest and then back down. But anyway, I mean, we could talk for hours about it. You seem like a very reasonable person. I don't ascribe any bad motives to you at all. We just have read a lot of the same stuff and come to a different conclusion. But my real concern is that, as I said, I fervently believe that the CIA killed Kennedy. And I would quibble with you on your assessment of Kennedy in Russia. Kennedy was actually back-channeling Nikita Khrushchev. And Khrushchev was not a nice person. There's nothing I can say that would be nice about Khrushchev, but he and Kennedy both shared one thing in common, and that is neither of them wanted nuclear war. And they were working behind the scenes, back channeling with each other and working to avoid a nuclear confrontation. And I think they both cared about about humanity and did not want to be contributing to the end of humanity. And so the theory is that the military-industrial complex and the CIA and the State Department were livid when they found out that Kennedy was back channeling Khrushchev, and that Kennedy also wanted to get us out of Vietnam, which he had actually helped get us into early in his administration. So there were a lot of reasons for the intelligence community and the military-industrial complex to be really mad at Kennedy. And so that's...
So I talked to Oliver Stone's main guy, after I came out, and he was we met for a few hours, and he talked to me about Stone's theory. And well, first of all, let me say this. Oswald wouldn't know that Kennedy and Khrushchev were together. My point is, in Oswald's view, he was anti-Russian. And I did, by the way, start Devil's Chessboard, and somehow I didn't ever get into it. I've got it on my Kindle, I think. And so I met my good friend of mine, said it's great. On this thing with Oliver Stone, his contention is that Nixon, even at the end of Nixon's term, they had already got together. Again, the CIA was involved in it, a plan to assassinate Castro. And they were going to go get Castro. And they had triangulating fire assassination teams training. They had been, and actually the paymaster for this thing was a guy named Manuel Agario, who ended up being the paymaster. The place in the Mexican money trail in Watergate, he was the guy through whom they were washing money in Mexico City. He was the same paymaster that was dealing with the Castro assassination plot. And the theory is that at some point, Kennedy got cold feet, decided not to carry through with it. The CIA was all on board on getting Castro. The mob was on board, the CIA was on board, and so forth, and that Kennedy had rubbed them the wrong way. So I thought the fellow was very compelling. You would know his name. If I told it to you, I'll think of it in a second, but he's a very well-known Sheehan. I believe it's Daniel Sheehan. You will see him. He's a brilliant guy that was Oliver Stone's brain, so to speak. And he's very well respected, and he and I met. But anyway, I'm not discounting your theories. I mean, and I've spoken, the guy that wrote the best book on Watergate, a guy named Jim Hogan, Hougan, former Atlantic Magazine bureau chief in Washington. He and I met. He wrote the best book about the CIA being involved in Watergate, and he's convinced that Kennedy was assassinated, and he's working on that right now, and he was assassinated by, I believe, the CIA. So I don't doubt there's people I respect. I've just named several believe that the CIA was involved, and I can't wait to take this to ground to read some of these things and see if I'm convinced.
Well, I would really be interested to know what your take is after you finish The Devil's Chessboard and The Unspeakable by Douglas and Roger Stone's book. They all seem to be pretty congruent to me. And so, as I said, I really was impacted by Kennedy's assassination. I mean, it gripped me as a 10-year-old. And so I've watched it, and now you roll all that forward to present day, and we've got Donald Trump, who had a chance to release the Kennedy files and declined to do so, just like Clinton, Obama, and Biden have had chances to release the files. They all declined to do so. And I have suspicions why they didn't. I think the CIA really is a shadow government. And I think they've done some very bad things. And I think they still have a stranglehold on our government, which is really kind of the point I was leading up to. I worked with Bob Shealy and Charles Bundren Bob Cheeley being in Atlanta and Charles Bundern is a Texas lawyer who filed a case against the Fulton Board of Elections in the days ensuing after the 2020 election. I've seen the evidence. I have played devil's advocate with our forensic accountants, our special witnesses, our expert witnesses. I've interviewed on this program numbers guys like David Cross in Atlanta. He's a finance guy who developed an obsession about 2020 in Georgia, and a former executive with PepsiCo who is a very credible individual. They independently have looked at 2020 in Georgia and both concluded that there were 40,000 illegal votes just in Fulton County and as many as 400,000 illegal votes in Fulton County, or in Georgia. Joe Rossi is the PepsiCo guy's name. And you can go on the Secretary of State's own website, Brad Raffensperger's, and you can find, as we have, Bob Cheeley. I am a lawyer, but I was not a lawyer on the case. I did fundraising and handled communications for the team. But I did review the briefs and edited the briefs and participated, gave them my 2 cents worth, but I tried not to get in the way as they litigated this case. But it gave me certainly a front row seat to look at the evidence. As I was about to say, 3,200 duplicate ballots are visible on the Secretary of State's website. We paid 20 interns to go through every single one of those ballots. They would identify a ballot as looking as if it were a duplicate, and then they would go back and put them side by side. And no one would deny that they are duplicate ballots. So that gets the 11,780 votes down to 8,000 votes. And now you look at the number of ballots that were stuffed into drop boxes, the number of people who were registered to vote from homeless shelters, UPS stores, and abandoned apartment buildings. I mean, the fraud was just incredible. So I asked myself, who could be capable of pulling a conspiracy, if you will, off like that? And I don't think there's any question that there are very few entities that would be able to do that. Donald Trump is a disruptor. He identified the deep state and the Washington swamp. And I just don't think there's any question that the intelligence community in this country, I don't know how far to go with it. And I have to hasten to say, I don't have hard evidence that they were involved. I do have very direct evidence that the media has consistently and persistently lied. I ran for Attorney General of Georgia in 2022, and I was interviewed by many members of the media, and I made them aware of the evidence. They don't dispute the evidence, but they don't write about it. And they invariably start by saying Donald Trump tried to overthrow the 2020 election without evidence. And it just, to me, seems to be JFK. I call it JFK 2.0. It seems to be a political coup to me. And I think it may be another 60 years before we get the truth on that. But
well, I think there's some good stuff written. I'm just been through a book called Debunked by an auditor, and he just goes through all the issues as an auditor. It's very good, by a guy named Epstein. It's worth your reading because he goes through the various swing states and identifies certain types of evidence. In many of these states, I think Georgia is one of them, where somebody will go out and just do a sample, may not be a demographically sound sample, but like sample a number of individuals that supposedly voted by mail, and a certain percentage of those say, no, I didn't vote by mail. I didn't vote.
Well, we uncovered just unbelievable anecdotal evidence from not hundreds, but dozens of people who said that they went to the poll to vote and they were told that they had already voted. And they just said, I didn't. And so how do you prove that you hadn't voted? But you hear it over and over again. After, 10 or 20 times, it takes on the ring of truth.
My only statement on this is that I don't think you need, though, to look at the intelligence agency or anything when you have the Democrats are, could carry this off very well. I mean, like one of my friends argued with me, oh, gee, you think this is some sort of coordinated effort? How could they do that? Well, there's something called the DNC. There are ground games that are centrally coordinated, and there are many organizations working together. Molly Ball wrote that famous piece in Time magazine about how all these folks got together the big shots to try to influence the election and put a lot of money behind these get out the vote campaigns. Once you start having get out the vote, you're paying people to get out the vote, they can get out the vote, and we know how they can get out the vote.
I'm optimistic in that, like in Georgia, Senate Bill 202 got away with drop boxes except in the polling place, which still makes me scratch my head. I don't understand why you would take your ballot to the polling place and put it in a drop box when you could turn left and go into a voting booth. I mean, there's no intellectual explanation for that to me, other than drop boxes or instrumentalities for fraud is what I believe. So why do we still have them? I don't know. But we don't have COVID. We don't have millions upon millions of absentee ballots being mailed indiscriminately out to people. And there's a piece of me that also kind of believes that regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, that 4 years of ineptness and incompetence and corruption, it doesn't matter what party you're in. Enough is enough. And I think people have kind of warmed up to maybe Donald Trump and accept him with his brashness.
Well, I just hope, I still fear widespread cheating. In Arizona, you don't need to prove citizenship to vote. And so there's one state that may go by the boards. And of course, you still have the Stacey Abrams no check signature type of stuff in Georgia, which Raffensperger rolled over for. So I'm not completely confident as I sit here that there won't be widespread fraud again. And if there is, all hell's going to break loose is what I'll tell you, because I do think Trump is surging. I think he's going to win if the votes are correctly counted.
I have watched every presidential race since Richard Nixon and Kennedy in 1960. I put on my first bumper sticker as a 7-year-old for Richard Nixon. I probably wasn't acting real independently, but my dad and mom were for Nixon. My relatives were for Nixon, and we came from a small rural town in mid-Ohio, and so it was in my DNA. But my point is, in all of my days, and as an observer and a political activist, I have never seen a presidential campaign that has been better conducted and has been more thoroughly, just every single base has been touched. And the competence that the Trump organization has shown has just really blown me away in terms of how well they have done. And they've developed coalitions. I mean, you've got Elon Musk, Bobby Kennedy Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard all supporting the same candidate. And I just tell you, I don't look at it from a partisan standpoint at this point. I'm not worried about a red wave. I'm worried about a red, white, and blue wave. We have got to protect the foundational values of this country, like freedom of speech and the franchise, to be able to have a republic. And I'm like you. Cheating is my number one concern come Tuesday.
Right. No, I'm just got my fingers crossed on this one, because I see if they're controlling the government this time, there's more people coming across the border. They're going to be loosening standards on voting. The government is being used to register people as we speak. I just don't like the whole thing, but we'll see. We'll see. Got to win this one. Maybe there's enough of a surge, like they say, too big to rig. I hope that's true.
To me, that phrase that Trump is so fond of repeating, I get where he's coming from. I just think it's idealistic and a little bit of naivete that may be a result of his, what we know to be a pretty oversized ego. But like yourself, I've been trained as a lawyer. I can argue either side. My internal conversations are very complex sometimes. But in defense of Trump, he makes these outlandish statements, and damned if 6 months later it turns out that he was right. So let's just hope that he is right this time. I do think there is a movement in this country, and I do think it is a red, white, and blue wave that we're witnessing. I think people really do care about the Constitution and the rule of law, and that's what they're responding to, I hope. Well, John O'Connor, thank you very much. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. We have not agreed on everything, but we've agreed on probably more than we have disagreed on. And those things that we disagreed on, we were able to have a very respectful, I think, reasonable conversation. And I thank you for that.
It's been a great one for me. I've got to get back to Devil's Chessboard is what I got to do.
I really would like to hear from you when you finished it. You've got our media sheet. My cell phone number is on it. Call me anytime. And I don't get to the West Coast very much, but I do have a 1-year-old granddaughter who is in Los Angeles, and we are going to go visit her and her parents in about 2 weeks for Thanksgiving. So I don't know if you come to the East Coast, but if you're ever in West Palm Beach, Florida, I really hope you'll give me a call, and we'll settle all of these very weighty things over a cold beer or maybe some clear liquid if you like vodka. Either one is my...
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love that. Well, great conversation, and thank you.
Thank you very much, and I wish you well.
All right. Take care. See you.
I want you to know how grateful I am to each one of our listeners and viewers of our live stream. We really don't take this airtime for granted. It is such an honor and a privilege to be able to come to you each week with our insights into the news of the day. As I'm fond of saying, we watch the news so you don't have to. We also would like to encourage our radio listeners to go to rumble.com, youtube.com, and getter.com, search for Jon Gordon Truth, and subscribe to our channel. That little act of kindness on your part would go so far because it would help us expand our reach. And for a limited time only, if you will subscribe to our channel and then email me at jongordontruth@gmail.com, we will put you in a raffle for this once-in-a-lifetime Trump hat signed by none other than Rudy Giuliani. Wow. And that's the truth, and thank you for your consideration.
Just who is Donald J. Trump? We've been thinking. Some say they don't understand him or his style. There may be cultural differences between someone born and bred in New York and other parts of the country, but what drives this man? Who is he? Let's start in New York City. Anyone who's lived there knows what a tough place that is, not for the weak. It demands excellence, perseverance, no nonsense. You have to be good at what you do, be upfront. Phonies get spit out fast. Have you noticed he speaks directly, too directly for some? But do you want the opposite, to find out the hard way who he really is? Ladies, don't we want to know the man? Since Donald was born into a comfortable New York family, what drove him to work so hard, even until today? Why did he become such an overachiever? Isn't the answer just his fundamental quest for greatness? From towering skyscrapers to superb elegance, through twists of finance and the sheer pace of it all, New York inspired greatness. Wasn't greatness at the very core of America's spirit? To break away from tyrannical government, achieve individual freedom of speech and religion, to brave the unknown? Some don't like Donald's tweets. Why does he do that? It's to communicate, and he wants to communicate with us because we matter to him. Communication is essential to understanding, the experts say. The more we communicate, the better off we are. There may be cultural differences in how and what we communicate what is said publicly, but let's be honest. Isn't human nature about the same everywhere, with similar follies? What was that phrase about casting the first stone? It's not important that we had difficulties in our lives, only how we emerged at the end. How did our choices shape us, and did they bring wisdom? Thanks to relentless media and lawsuits, we know almost everything about Donald J. Trump. Can we say the same about the others? Donald Trump began as a builder, learning how essential people are to any great enterprise. He shares this understanding with leaders around the world. Big Apple was infused with greatness, like the words of Frankie's song. Trump picked up this baton early in life, ran with it, and now wants to pass it on to us to be sure America and its people stay great. Would we want our children to emulate Donald J. Trump? You bet. And tweaking the small stuff won't be hard. We're at a fork in the road, America, a crisis point. Our good nature has been deceived, used in many ways. It's time to correct course. We can do it. Let's not miss this opportunity to recognize a gift. Let's reclaim America, the greatness within. This is what Donald Trump wishes for us all.
God bless America. God keep us safe. God be it thy will. Help us elect the next president of the United States. And be it thy will, let it be Donald J. Trump and J.D. Vance. Because we want to make America great again. And that's the truth. I'm John Gordon.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life. And I had to start again with just my children and my wife.
I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, where the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota
to the hills of Tennessee,
across the plains of Texas, oh, from sea to shining sea.
from Detroit down to Houston, and New York to LA, where there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say, oh, and I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. God bless this country. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt